I didn't hear nothing though.
And good morning.
Good morning.
Me too.
Me too.
Whoever was coughing there, me too. Oh. I just emailed everybody a bunch of resources. You should all have them.
What to do now? Let's see.
Got a pretty good Brady Bunch of you popping up this morning. I like it.
You're mute, man. I do. Let's see, nurture. I ain't got no email.
I sent them out a few minutes ago. It may take a minute for it to get there, but I did send them out.
Okay. Hey, Martha.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I need to mute this mic, don't I?
Hey, when the time comes, Michelle. Huh?
What'd you say?
I was asking you, what did you say?
Oh, I said I need to mute this mic.
Oh, yeah.
I ain't got no business. Hey, Boom.
Because I don't see the resources either.
No, I ain't got it yet.
All right, let me double check.
Maybe you need to refresh the page. I got mine, but I had to refresh my email page.
I just signed in.
Yeah, too.
Got mine too.
Refresh this one.
I sent them to the emails that y'all use to register for the class.
Okay.
I'll make sure.
Well, I still don't.
I'll make sure.
I don't see mine. Let me look over here. No, I still don't.
All right, Martha Harris.
Right.
I don't see mine either. Laura Washington.
Washington Laura at hotmail.com.
That's right.
It was sent.
There. Yet.
And who was the other person? Martha Harris?
Yep.
Martha Harris at hotmail.com.
I don't have it.
Okay.
Either.
It was sent to those email addresses. I can resend it after the class. We'll give it a little while to get there.
Okay.
Hotmail can just be slow. Oh, we got a couple more people. Excuse me. It's got 15. We should have 18. We have 3 more people. We'll give them a couple of minutes to get here.
I need to answer them first.
What's the question?
You hear me?
Well, you're not muted, so yeah.
Okay. I just need to know what resources you were talking about. I just got up there.
Who is this?
Ruth Brown.
All right, Ms. Brown, I sent an email. Did any of y'all sign up? Okay, no. Ruth, brown.ruth49@yahoo.com.
Yes.
It was sent to that email address.
Because I switched this yesterday. I was supposed to go to the one on the 16th.
Right.
So, okay, let me see.
Yeah, but I pulled these email addresses up late last night. So, you know, because I wanted to be sure I got everybody. I like taking care of my teachers. It's sort of my thing. We're still missing a couple. Oh, well. Everybody that's here. I did send the resources out. You don't have to have them for today's lesson. Oh, hold on. Now we're just missing one. Let's give them a minute. Okay, here's what we'll do. Throughout the day or the next 2 hours, check your email off and on. If they pop up, great. If they don't, at the end, stick around, give me your, we'll verify your email addresses or whatever, and I'll make sure you go. These are not things you need today as much as what, resources you might want to use for teaching Arkansas history in your classroom. Okay, who's running the daycare center?
Mm-hmm. I cannot hear him.
You can't hear the kids? Obviously, other people hear the kids too. I love kids, so that's cool.
He has said, your friend has said, she is taking.
Helen, is that at your? Okay, why don't you mute for a little bit? All right. But like we're saying on the resources, these are just things you may want to use with your classes. All right. My name's Jay Southard. I am the Career Technical Education Coordinator for the Great Rivers Educational Co-op in Helena. It's early. I have coffee. And you're probably wondering, why is a CTE coordinator teaching Arkansas history? Because I'm a history teacher. I love Arkansas. I love history. That's what my degree's in. I'm the only licensed history teacher at the co-op, so y'all are stuck with me. But I put a lot of time into these presentations, and I try to come up with some interesting stuff that y'all can actually have fun with. Now, we are going to talk today about World War II in Arkansas. Now, we have a significant reason why we're going to talk about World War II in Arkansas. This year is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II. It ended 75 years ago this year. Let's see, May 8th was the end of the war in Europe, and August 14th was the end of the war in Japan. And y'all are probably thinking, okay, this is Arkansas. What did we have to do with World War II? Anybody asking that question? You can raise your hands or talk, or yeah, it's a good question, right? But this is Arkansas. What do we have? Man, World War II in Arkansas, we had a lot to do with each other. So let me share this screen. And we're going to talk about World War II in Arkansas. All right, y'all see that? Somebody unmute and talk to me so that.
Yes, we can see it.
We see it.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, now, I'm up for open discussion. I like talking during the middle of class. Any of you who have ever sat through one of my PDs knows me, and I love for people to just jump on in there anytime and let's talk about things. That's how we learn. And with Zoom, it makes it tough because I can't really see you in this mode. Let me minimize this. Yeah, I hate that. It makes it hard for me to see the participants. So y'all be sure and hold on, I'm trying to get the chat. See, it's not even let me see the chat window this morning. I love Zoom. So y'all just jump in there verbally and talk to me and if you have any questions. But let's start out. World War II. It was a different time. People don't realize how different it was. Routine flying across the ocean was still not routine. If people traveled to Europe or something like that, they didn't jump on a plane. They jumped on a ship 9 times out of 10, and they took a ship across, and it would take a while. It was a different way of life. They didn't have CNN telling them instantly what was going on. They didn't have a lot of the stuff. In Arkansas at that time, we were a very rural state. We had a huge population that was just having a hard time of doing anything. The majority of our farmers were tenant farmers or sharecroppers. You know, it was just a different, totally different time. So the United States got drug into World War II because of what event? Anybody?
The bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. That brought us into the war. It was a surprise attack. It was pretty devastating. And unlike today, nobody knew about it until the next day. And they woke up the next day, they had everything going, and all of a sudden, here is a news broadcast on the radio that they listened to.
Senators and representatives, I have the distinguished honor of presenting the President of the United States.
Mr. Vice President, Mr. Speaker, members of the Senate, of the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation
Sorry about that, guys.
with its government and its emperor looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense, but always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us.
All right. Y'all get the gist of that, right? Can you picture yourself waking up, getting together with your family, turning on the radio, and all of a sudden finding out that we're at war? And we were attacked in a very cowardly way from a country that we've been having problems with. How would y'all feel about that? Jump in there. Anybody?
You would be disheartened.
Oh, I'd be mad.
Or even fearful.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, I mean, we're in rural Arkansas, where, you know, even where Little Rock back then was not exactly what you would call uptown urban. I mean, it was a different time, and people are all of a sudden thrust into this, and it was a different era where people were proud to be Americans. You know, it was right now, with all the turmoil that's going on right now, it's just not, it's hard for some people to understand, especially some of our youth, to understand how people felt back then. And it was because of everything they'd gone through, the Great Depression, World War I, all this other stuff that the government actually helped get resolved and bring the country together. And there was a pride. So when this attack happened, what was the result? A lot of fear, a lot of hatred, a lot of things going on. Well, during World War II, over 200,000 Arkansans volunteered for the armed forces. Is that surprising? Anybody? Interactive class.
It's not surprising, because as you look at current events such as 9/11, you had a lot of people to volunteer.
I know it was. I was in law enforcement then. My history, I spent 10 years in the Navy. I was a Cold War veteran. The USSR was our big bad enemy. I was in the Navy during Desert Storm. I didn't serve overseas. I was on recruiting duty in West Memphis when Desert Storm happened. But I did get the honor of serving almost 3 years on the USS Lexington. The USS Lexington was commissioned in 1943 and was very active in World War II. I was on the oldest carrier in the Navy at the time, and she was a great ship. She sailed really well. 92, they turned her into a museum. That was at the same time I was getting out of the Navy. But think back to 9/11, guys. When we woke up and we saw those towers fall, how did it make us feel?
I was in the 6th grade when that happened, and we still had televisions in our class and were able to see it. It was devastating because we're all the way in Arkansas and kind of think like, how did that happen or why did it happen?
Right. And we
Also united us. It was us versus them, so we came together.
How many American flags were out that next week?
A lot.
There was an American flag in front of almost every house in the country that next week. There were no differences at that point. Everybody was Americans, and everybody wanted to come together, and everybody was mad. Well, it was the same way on December 8th. So everybody goes in and joins the military, or a very large group. But this is only the beginning of the part that Arkansas played during the war. Incarcerated Japanese Americans, acts as prisoners of war, ammunition manufacturing, mining, teacher shortages, major teacher shortages, all made the early 1940s and World War II times a notable time in Arkansas history. All right, we've all got frameworks and standards to cover, so here's what we're going to cover in today's training. You will all get it. If you haven't received it yet, those of you who have already got your resources have a handout that includes a PDF of this presentation. So your standards are all included in that printout you've got. But we're going to be covering all of this today: military contributions, wartime industry, domestic food production, social economic effects, Japanese incarceration in prison of war camps. So, Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941 marks the beginning of American involvement in World War II. World War II was already going on, guys, prior to us getting involved. Basically, the French, the British, the Germans were all having their own little private war over in Europe. The Japanese conflict didn't actually start until December 7th. But in Europe, you know, everything was really going on, and they had a war. So by the time we joined the war, the European campaign was already full swing. Germany had already claimed a lot of land and killed a lot of people. Well, when we joined, Arkansans rushed to volunteer for the service in the armed forces. How about this? Lepanto, Arkansas, very small town. The entire high school football team joined the Navy. Okay, that's dedication. Black Arkansans joined the military in large numbers. The majority were placed in all black units under the command of white officers. It was still a very backwards time in our country during race relations. It was, yeah, it was just wrong. Women from Arkansas served in all branches of the armed forces. Not only that, as we're going to find out here in a little bit, women took charge of manufacturing. They kept manufacturing going and brought it to Arkansas. By the end of the war, 10% of the citizens of Arkansas, over 200,000 people, had served in the United States military. Now, 35% of the prospective recruits didn't qualify for military service. Several had severe health problems, such as malaria, malnutrition. Another large group couldn't read or write well enough to meet Army standards. But they still participated, a lot of them, in other ways. During 4 years of the war, 4,611 Arkansans were killed in action. 3,814 in the Army and Army Air Corps, 797 in the Navy and the Marine Corps. We had Arkansans making the ultimate sacrifice. You know, they gave everything they had for the country. In some ways, they were the greatest generation when it came to sacrifice. In other ways, not so much, but they were a great generation. Yeah, go ahead.
That flow drive?
I think so. Remember, don't tell Jay, don't tell nobody what I told you, okay?
Oh, so that wasn't for us?
Yeah, I think the floor drive, try it. Is it?
Go ahead. What's the question? All right. We did have one famous person in the Army who was born in Little Rock. And it's kind of funny why he was born in Little Rock, but General Douglas MacArthur. Any of y'all heard of him? When I ask questions like these, the answers are because we have more than one generation in here, and I'd like to know what y'all's background is before we go any further.
I saw the movie.
Okay. Is anybody in here not heard of General MacArthur?
I've never heard of him.
All right. General MacArthur was...
the museum in Little Rock.
He is. MacArthur was born in January 26th, my birthday, by the way, January 26th, but I was born after 1880. He was born in the Arsenal Barracks in Little Rock. His dad was in the Army and stationed at the Little Rock Arsenal. He served as a commander of the U.S. Armed Forces in the Far East during World War II. He was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions at the Bataan Peninsula, the Philippine Islands, in April of '42. Early in on the Japanese part of our entry into the war, the Philippines were one of our allies. We used and we took care of the Philippines. We actually had a major port there. The Philippine Islands were being claimed by the Japanese, and they came in and took over and basically ran the U.S. forces off of the Philippine Islands. Took a lot of American POWs. POWs, prisoners of war. And he was real famous when he left saying, "I will return." And he came back, and under his leadership, we took back the Philippine Islands, which were very strategic in us winning the war over Japan. He also ended up commanding our forces in Korea during the active part of the Korean conflict. And he won the Congressional Medal of Honor. And for those of you who do not know what the Congressional Medal of Honor is, it is the highest award given by the United States military. 9 times, well, not quite 90%, like 78%. I used to know the number of people receiving the Congressional Medal of Honor receive it posthumously, or they're dead when they get it. Well, we had a number of Arkansans who won the Congressional Medal of Honor, including Maurice Lee Britt from Lone Oak, Nathan Green Gordon from Morrilton, James Richard Hendricks from Lepanto, Edgar Harold Lloyd from Blytheville, Seymour W. Terry from Little Rock, Wilson Douglas Watson from Earl, and Jack Williams from Harrison. Guys, look at these towns these people are from. This is rural Arkansas. These heroes, one came from Little Rock. But at this time, back in the 1940s, I mean, Earl, Arkansas, that's Crittenden County. There wasn't a whole lot there when I left. You know, it was a small town. This was rural Arkansans, and they came together and they did a lot of the heroic stuff. I mean, it was a great generation, like I said. Maurice Lee Britt. He wasn't your typical Arkansan, even though he came from Lone Oak. He was born in Carlisle, grew up in Lone Oak, graduated from the University of Arkansas, go Hogs, played professional football with the Detroit Lions, joined the Army as a lieutenant, and then on Mount Rotondo in Italy, led a group of 8 men against a group of approximately 100 Germans. He was wounded, but managed to keep the German troops from overtaking their position. Won the Congressional Medal of Honor and served as Lieutenant Governor of Arkansas from 1967 to 71. Like I said, he wasn't exactly what you'd call a typical Arkansan, but he was still an Arkansan born in a small town. One thing that Arkansas was helpful with for the country, all of the military saw a huge influx of people. Y'all can imagine, right? A lot of people joining the military. Do you think there were adequate training facilities to handle all of these people?
No.
Nope.
No.
Nowhere close. I mean, we weren't ready for this. So out of nowhere, we're going to start building camps and forts and training facilities around the country. Arkansas was prime real estate for a couple of reasons. And it was very popular for training. Why do you think Arkansas would be so popular as a training location?
A lot of open landscape.
That's one good reason, yes. What do you think the primary reason might be?
Probably location.
You're absolutely right. Location, location, location. Why does FedEx fly out of Memphis? It's in the middle of the country. You don't have to fly cross country to go anywhere. Anywhere in the United States, it's no more than half a country away. So it makes it cost productive for FedEx to fly out of Memphis. For the same reason, we had people joining the military from all over the country. We wanted to have centralized resources where we could send the troops without having to spend as much money and time on transportation. But we had all the railroads and everything we needed in Arkansas. So Camp Robinson in North Little Rock became a massive military base with tens of thousands of soldiers living there at any given time. You know, it's not 10,000 soldiers there over World War II. At any given time, there were 10,000 plus soldiers there. And increased demand for training facilities resulted in the construction of many facilities across the state. Big thing was we needed pilots. We needed people to work on aircraft. If you ever look at the state of Arkansas, especially in the Delta, with the exception of Crawley's Ridge, it's pretty flat. So you can imagine it's not real hard to build landing strips in Arkansas. And so we had Army airfields built, Walnut Ridge, Newport, and Stuttgart, which were all basically Delta farmland, which also helped these little towns because there wasn't a lot going on in Walnut Ridge, Newport, and Stuttgart. Now here's one camp that's a little unusual, and most people were real happy to have these training facilities in their towns. Why do you think?
Jobs.
Jobs.
Jobs and just pure money. If I owned a diner in Stuttgart, Arkansas, and they're opening an airstrip in a training facility where they're going to be anywhere from 1,000 or so airmen learning how to fly, well, you think my business would be pretty good?
Yeah.
Yeah, because all of these soldiers and airmen are being paid. And there's nothing that somebody, and I can tell you this from experience, nothing that a person in the military likes more than spending money. They like spending money, and the money was going back into these small local economies. There was an exception. They had a camp near Magnolia, Arkansas, which is down in southwest Arkansas, called Camp Magnolia. And it was built to house conscientious objectors. Now, who in here does not know what a conscientious objector is? Anybody? All right. So everybody knows what a conscientious objector is. Well, these people who refused to serve in the armed forces, and a lot of them were for religious reasons. It was wrong to kill. They would get shipped to camps like Camp Magnolia, and they worked on conservation projects in the area. They weren't respected at all by the local residents. Now, these people brought money into the community around Magnolia, but the people still hated them. Anybody know why?
Probably felt like they were cowards not wanting to serve like everyone else.
That's exactly right. Think about the time. We'd gone through that. America had recovered from a lot prior to World War II. And there was a pride in America. And if you weren't willing to fight for your country, well, you just weren't thought very well of. People didn't really want to be around you. And so these soldiers, even though they were bringing money to the economy, they were not liked. Hot Springs, on the other hand, gained a lot of importance as military redistribution center for returning soldiers. In 1944, the Army took over most of the city's hotels, and soldiers from the West Central states spent an average of 2 weeks updating records, obtaining physicals. There were more than 32,000 members of the military processed in Hot Springs. Of all the places to send and do this, why do you think the military used Hot Springs?
Not that far from Little Rock.
It is. They had rail transportation to get there. But Hot Springs was already a resort town. What do resort towns all have? Hotels. Lots of hotels and restaurants. They have places to house people. Those of you who may not know, and you want another study to get into, I've got one for you. Check in on Hot Springs. And the next time we do this, I may do a history of Hot Springs. Hot Springs was Vegas before Vegas was. People from all over the country, when they wanted to go to a resort town, the first town they thought of, well, was probably Atlantic City. But the second place they thought of was Hot Springs, Arkansas, of all the places. The New York Yankees, for a period of time, actually did their spring training in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Babe Ruth was a regular in Hot Springs, Arkansas. A lot of your movie stars of that era, when they wanted to escape, they came to Hot Springs, Arkansas. So Hot Springs was a booming area. A lot of illegal gambling, a lot of places to buy alcohol and party. It's just a recreational town. So since all of these buildings and all existed, and we had a huge, huge Army hospital in Hot Springs, it just made sense. Let's use Hot Springs as a way to process these people that were coming back. Are y'all starting to see how economically World War II was helping the state?
Mhm.
It really was. We had a lot of people coming in and training and using resources in Arkansas. Well, we actually jumped in it even more. At that time in Arkansas, there was no real industry. What was our number one industry in the early 1940s?
Would it be agriculture?
It really would. We're a farming state. Farming and forestry, depending on where you were in the state. We were a huge forestry state. When you went west of Little Rock, when you went east of Little Rock, we were growing cotton. Cotton was our number one crop. Cotton was still king, but we're going to get into agriculture a little bit more. But so we didn't have any industry. Well, wartime production plants were built in Arkansas during World War II, 6 of them. The factories were located in Camden, El Dorado, Jacksonville, March, and Pine Bluff. There was a site in Hope, but was not used for manufacturing. It was a proving grounds. we blew up bombs to test how good they were. During the peak of production, we had more than 25,000 defense workers working in these plants. And who were the majority of these workers?
Women.
They were.
Yep.
I'll guarantee you there's a few of your grandmas out there, or great grandmas, who played with bombs in the early 40s in Arkansas. Now, not many maybe, but I'll guarantee if we dug deep enough, we could find one or two. And sorry about the pop-ups. Yes, I know I have an Arkansas History Zoom scheduled. All right. But these women manufactured items, explosives, detonators, fuses, explosive primers. They played with bombs. I think that's really cool. You know, let Rosie the Riveter go make rivets in California. Arkansas ladies, they're better than that. They make explosives. Now, one thing that they did do, the federal government has a habit of building towns. I don't know if y'all know this. There's a couple of towns in Arkansas that were actually built by the U.S. government. One of them is Whitehall, Arkansas. Is everybody familiar with the city of Whitehall or the town of Whitehall?
Yes, it's near Pine Bluff.
It is. It's right next to Pine Bluff. The Army needed to build, or the military needed to build a place to make very special weapons. And they wanted it in the middle of the country for distribution reasons. So they built the town of Whitehall and built our country's #1 chemical weapons production plant. And that picture on the left there is workers at that production plant in Whitehall. Chemical weapons are particularly nasty weapons, and we used Whitehall to stockpile those weapons in the United States up until the early 2000s. All of those nasty weapons have all been destroyed now, but all within the last 20 years. Now, the picture on the right, that's a typical work crew at an Arkansas munitions plant. I love that picture. You don't mess with ladies from Arkansas. Now,
You better know it.
that's right. Now, Arkansas was an agricultural state. We've talked about that. That was our manufacturing, our industry. However, we weren't real good at it in 1940. Tenant farmers, sharecroppers cultivated more than 60% of the land, and more than 90% of the farmers used horses or mules as draft animals. There were a few tractors in the state, but there weren't many. People couldn't afford them. Tractors were expensive. Well, utilizing horses and mules, you can only do so much in a field. So productivity in our fields and in our farming methods were not good. Where we had a lot of land, we didn't have a lot of production enhancement. Well, the military had a problem because of all these hundreds and hundreds of thousands of new troops. Almost famous old war saying, an army moves on its stomach. What do you think that means?
You got to keep them fed, keep them moving.
If you don't have supply lines bringing in food and fuel, you don't have an army. Well, where's this food going to come from? Because we still got a country back home where everybody's expecting to eat. So we have to find a way to increase the output of food coming out of our country. Not just food, but other things as well. But we're going to concentrate on food. Mechanization became more and more common. The government helped. The government helped by providing low or no interest loans to farmers to buy tractors. You know, one tractor could replace 10 men. It really sped up production. It really boosted everything. And it made it possible for us to modernize our agricultural production in Arkansas. Also, they reconsidered what we were growing. Like I said, 1940, cotton was our #1 production. At 1.2 million acres in cotton. They only had 153,000 acres of rice and 176,000 acres of soybeans. Well, while cotton is nice and very profitable, you can't eat it. I take that back. They make cottonseed oil now, but you can't eat the cotton. So it made us rethink some things. Well, we're starting getting more tractors in the state. When the increased mechanization allowed, #1, the majority of y'all, I think, are in the Delta. Do we have anybody who doesn't live in the Delta?
I don't.
Who is this?
Christy Henry.
Okay, where are you from?
I'm actually from Northwest Arkansas. I live in Prairie Grove, Arkansas.
Okay.
I couldn't make it to our meeting, so I just Googled on the ESC shoebox to find a different Arkansas history.
You know, my last one I had 2 days ago, I only had one person from Great Rivers out of a class of 17. I thought it was great because I'm a glory hound. I like to show off in front of as many people as I can. So, okay, so here's the thing. If you come into the Delta, it's farmland as far as you can see. That's what we have. I mean, it's just flat farmland. During the spring and summer, the two things you're going to see are crops and crop dusters and a few tractors and a few whatever. You don't see a lot of stuff. Northwest Arkansas, y'all are still big into forestry. Y'all also have the manufacturing, food production through Tyson. Y'all got a lot of different areas going for you. In the Delta, we're still farmers. We just farm on a huge scale. Back then, though, a lot of our farmland was still swampland. And using horses, mules, and manual labor, yeah, it was tough to develop farmland. To clear the swamps out, to move the dirt, to pump out the water, to remove the trees. I mean, it was huge. It was almost too much to do. So by buying all these tractors and all this heavy equipment, it enabled us to grow the areas that we could grow. Our production agriculture area grew by leaps and bounds. We had a lot of land brought into food production. And cotton was still important. I mean, manufacturing in cotton and clothing, one thing about the military, they liked their uniforms. So we still had to produce cotton, but it went down. We didn't need as much cotton because it was more important to feed our troops and feed the people. So they increased their production of rice and soybeans. And rice and soybean production has grown at a much faster rate than cotton since World War II. Okay, here's an interesting one for you. Where does Arkansas stand in the United States as a producer of rice?
In the top. I think we're #1. Actually, most of the rice comes from here.
We are #1. There's more rice produced in the state of Arkansas than any other state in the country, which might be a reason that Riceland Rice has their headquarters in Stuttgart, Arkansas.
Yep.
Yep. We make rice. That is our #1 production crop. It's profitable. It's not hard to grow. And we've got perfect land for it. So we're making a lot more food after the first year or two of the war. But are we making enough food to feed everybody? No, we're not. Because there are so many troops. So rationing has to go into effect, and it happens very early in the war. Now, what all did we ration? Anybody have any ideas?
Coffee.
Coffee, yes.
Meat and staple foods.
Meat and staple foods, yes. How about gasoline, rubber, steel, cloth, fabric? You found ourselves rationing everything.
Yeah, I was just gonna say everything.
Because, I mean, if you needed a set of new tires on your truck, you'd be lucky to get one. Gasoline was rationed because where was the fuel needed? It was needed to support the war effort. So it really made it tough on people. Now, victory gardens were very, very common early in World War II. Now, a lot of people had their own gardens in Arkansas prior to World War II. And it boosted during World War II because that was a way to get your own food, you know, and you don't think about things going bad because back then canning was it. I've been married to the same wonderful woman for almost 30 years, and we raise a bunch of tomatoes. And before the summer's over, we will have salsa, stewed tomatoes, tomato sauce, all in mason jars in the pantry to get us through the next year. That's in 2020, there's not a lot of people that still do canning. Now in Arkansas, we probably got more than most. But back in the 1940s, everybody did it, regardless of where you were from. And why did you do it?
Ensure you had enough food.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, you could grow your own tomatoes and can them, and it would still be a lot less expensive than buying canned. And frankly, I'd rather have stewed tomatoes out of a mason jar than a can. They taste better. So victory gardens were real popular, and they increased to give people more food. But we had another problem. Even with our industry, the wages in Arkansas were not real high. Well, we had a lot of people leave the state, and they went primarily to Michigan and California. What's Michigan known for making?
Cars.
Cars. Well, during World War II, they weren't making that many cars. They were making tanks, jeeps, personnel carriers. They were making transportation for war. They were paying good, and there were a lot of jobs. What do you think they were making in California? They were making aircraft. They were making planes. My grandfather was raised in Salem, Arkansas. And my dad was born in San Diego in 1942 because right after the war started, my grandfather went to work for McDonnell Douglas in San Diego, making airplanes. Now, one thing about teachers, most of us are smarter than the average bear. If you want somebody to get a good job who's got some brains in their head, go find a teacher. Well, as a result of that, nearly half the teachers in the state left education because they could make a lot higher pay in wartime industry. There was a lot more money to be made. So they didn't just leave education, they left Arkansas. As an example, an Arkansas teacher made about $700 a year in 1940. Factory workers were making $2,400 a year, more than 3 times the same amount. You think we have a teacher shortage now? No, nothing compared to what they had back then. But many schools in the state failed due to lack of teachers. It was a tough time, guys. It was a very tough time. So, the picture on the left, do with less so they'll have enough. And that guy's drinking a cup of coffee. Coffee was rationed. On the far right, victory gardens. They were promoted because by planting a victory garden, you were leaving more food available for the troops. So you were helping win the war. The middle picture, that's a ration line. Right, so you're out in town and everything, and you find out that the local store got some flour in. Well, I can cook a lot of stuff with flour. Biscuits, bread, corn, pancakes, anything. Flour is very, very useful, you think?
Yeah.
Well, they would only get so much in. And you had a card that you carried with you. It's called a ration card. And whenever you picked up something, they would note on the card that you had picked up something. That kept you from going back to the back of the line and picking up more than one. And when it came in, you got in line, and you were there to pick up your allotment of whatever, let's say flour or sugar or, or coffee. And when it was gone, it was gone. So as soon as you heard, you got in line. So let's go back over economic effects. Economically, Arkansas experienced a boom. Wartime manufacturing brought new jobs to the state. Increased agricultural prices meant more profits for farmers. And what do you think these farmers did with a lot of their profits?
Land.
Say again?
Oh, I didn't know I was off mute. I said probably put it back into the land. I was just thinking out loud.
I didn't know, you thought right. They would put it into developing more, more land that they could actually cultivate, and they buy equipment. Guys, I do not have the Rona. I have allergies that are wearing me out this morning. Sorry for that. I would mute myself for every cough, but they come with this, they're kind of a surprise. So we had increased agricultural prices, more profits. They were reinvesting. Servicemen undergoing training or stationed in Arkansas spent their money in local businesses. So everywhere from the local diner to the drugstore to the liquor store to whatever store was doing well because we had people in town spending money. It was a good economic time for Arkansas. All right, now let's talk about a little piece of dark history. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. It was a surprise attack. Let's go back to 9/11. How would you like to be a Muslim from the Middle East in the United States on 9/12 of 2001?
You weren't. You were going home or hiding.
Why?
Because they just assumed every one of them were guilty, even though they didn't necessarily have anything to do with what happened. They were already here, but they needed somebody to blame.
Bingo. Well, in 1941, early 1942, who did Americans love to hate? Japanese Americans. Every Japanese American was the enemy. Do you think that feeling has gone away since then, that we've gotten better and more tolerant?
No.
Nope.
My son-in-law is Korean. If I said the word Wuhan virus, what do you think I'm referring to? Guys, come on. What's the Wuhan virus?
Coronavirus.
Yeah, COVID-19, coronavirus.
Yeah.
People call it the China virus. Now, my son-in-law is not Chinese. He's Korean. shortly after this all really started going in, he noticed the looks and stares he was getting when he walked into Walmart in Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Now, people weren't hateful and he didn't threaten him or anything, but he could tell a distinct difference of how he was being looked at. That part of America really hasn't changed that much. The Americans, I think, still love to hate people based on stupid information. But in 1940, guys, you did not want to be a Japanese American in the United States, especially on the West Coast. If you were on the West Coast of the United States, they were worried that you were spying to help the Japanese invade the continental U.S. So Japanese Americans were moved away from the West Coast for fear of spying and sabotage for Japan. We had 2 Japanese internment camps in Arkansas. One was called Rower, and the other one was called Jerome. The Rower is located in Deshay County between Dumas and McGee. I've been there. I was born in Dumas. That's my people. So I know Rower. I'm familiar with it. I've heard about it off and on my entire life. Jerome is on the county line between Chico County and Drew counties farther south in Arkansas. Between 1942 and 1946, we had nearly 16,000 Japanese Americans held in these 2 camps. Now, when you think camps, you need to really think more like a small university, a small college, because you had the huge dining facility, you had barracks, you had health care, you had work for the people to do, but you did have fences with barbed wire at the top and guards on the towers. But everything was provided for the survival of these internees, which caused racial tensions with Arkansas for a couple of reasons. Number one, these were Japanese Americans. And did we want all these Japanese Americans in the middle of Arkansas? No, we didn't. We can't trust these people. They attacked us. It doesn't matter that some of these Japanese had been in the country for 3 or 4 generations and were contributing to America in some really great ways. Had nothing, that didn't matter. They were Japanese Americans. That was enough. Another problem was, all right, we're going to put one of these camps, let's just go to Rower, Deshay County, Arkansas in 1940. Guys, there's nothing there. Dumas and McGee were your 2 thriving urban areas. And the population in each one of them back then was probably 5,000, 6,000 people. They were small towns. There wasn't a lot of manufacturing. It was all agriculture. And there were a lot of people living in poverty. So all these people who are trying to figure out how to provide for their families start noticing that these fences are going up and we're bringing in all these Japanese Americans and we're feeding them, we're clothing them, we're giving them medical treatments and medical help, and we're paying them for jobs. How do you think that was looked at by the local population in the Delta in 1942?
They probably didn't like it.
They hated it. Why are we taking good care of these traders? Why aren't we taking care of our own? There's just something wrong with this. So people did not like having the camps here. On top of that, do you think the Japanese Americans wanted to be around the swamps of Deshay County, Arkansas? Not really. The majority of these people were out of California. You talking about culture shock? So these Japanese Americans, how did they end up at Rower? They were basically contacted by the Department of Defense or Department of the Army back then and told you got 24 hours to pack one suitcase per person. We'll be by tomorrow to pick you up. Now, what happened to everything else you owned?
You either gave it away or left it for anyone to take, I guess.
That's it. You lost everything else. Your house, everything in it that you could not fit into a suitcase.
And I added in the chat, there is a picture book called Baseball Saved Us that's very good for introducing this. And also George Takai, I think is how you say his name. If you go to YouTube and type in his name in internment camps, he talks a lot about his experiences with the Federals coming to his house and saying, put everything in a suitcase, we're leaving, you have an hour to get ready, and all about his experiences.
Guess what happens on the very next slide after this one?
You talk about that?
You're going to be listening to George Takai. This is going to be the last slide before we take a break. And when we come back, we're going to have George Takai talking to us. Now, those of you who don't know who George Takai is, how many Star Trek fans do we have out there? I am a Star Trek fan, original series. Oh my gosh, we have so many kids in education now, it's depressing. I'm sorry, but we really should be passing on our culture of the 60s and 70s better. This is on us, not you. George Takai played Sulu on Star Trek. Great actor. And he's huge in the gay movement. And, nobody ever imagined he was homosexual. He is. And I still love the dude. He is just so, now he's old now, guys. He's in his late 70s, early 80s. And he's still full of energy and full of stuff and full of hope and a very, very, very positive guy. But his family was in California, and he went to one of our camps in Arkansas, Rower in Deshay County. But this map you're looking at here, which is included in your handouts that I sent you, is a rough estimate. This is actually, there were more camps. There were a lot of smaller camps, but these are the major war relocation camps or internment camps for Japanese Americans during World War II. And internment camp may sound like a decent name. Guys, these were prisons. They were very similar and in some ways not as open as our prisoner of war camps. Because Japanese Americans were not allowed basically to leave the camp for any reason. And this is how we treated Americans. Before we go to the next slide, though, you need to know one thing, that how easy was it when you came in? When I say the Great Melting Pot, what country am I talking about?
United States.
Why?
Everybody comes here.
Everybody.
Okay, we had Irish and British and Russians and Germans all flocking to the United States. We had African Americans or Africans who were coming in, mostly of their not of their own free will early. Later on, yes. And could they become citizens?
Had to go through a series of tests, answering questions. I think Ellis Island, a lot of them came into there.
Mm-hmm. They did, you're right. But they could all become American citizens. That made us the great melting pot. Guys, Asian Americans, whether they came from China, Vietnam, Korea, Japan, were not eligible for American citizenship. So these three generations of Japanese Americans who had lived in America for 2 or 3 generations, none of them were citizens because the U.S. government didn't allow them to become citizens. Bet you didn't know that. Is that new information for anybody out there?
That was new for me.
Yeah, it was just a backwards time. I can't tell you, and I've looked, I cannot tell you why we wouldn't allow it, but we wouldn't. I mean, and when you think about the contributions of Asian Americans, especially, let's talk about the railroad across the country. Who was the major labor force for the west side of the railroad? Chinese Americans.
Yeah.
Chinese. A lot of them they came in to get work, but they were not allowed to become citizens. It was a different time, guys. No, it's not the next slide, but when we get to George Takei, we're going to take a break. Okay, so Japanese interned. Did we let them fight in World War II? Yes, but only in Europe. We had 326 Japanese American men that joined the Army from the 2 camps in Arkansas, from Jerome and Rower. Ted Tenoy, one of those volunteers, was posthumously awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. All of these volunteers were assigned to the U.S. Army's 442nd Regiment combat team that fought in Europe. Why did we make them fight in Europe, guys? It's an easy question, but these are questions you might want to ask your students. Why Europe?
Because we weren't sure where their loyalties lied.
You're right. We didn't trust them to fight against the Japanese. Now a lot of them they'd been in the country for generations, but they were still Japanese Americans. We still didn't trust the Japanese because of Pearl Harbor. And we didn't want to expose them or put them in a circumstance where they might turn against American troops. So let's send them to Europe. All right, this is going to be the George Takei. It's 10:07. Why don't y'all take till 10:15, go grab a bathroom break. And we will get right back to it. Sound good?
Yep.
I'm going to be sitting right here
Yes.
if anybody has any questions.
The audio.
Well, hi.
Yeah. Hold on. Hold on just a minute. I'm sorry, Mr. Southern, I had to change over to my computer because my phone was acting up.
That's no problem. I've got you. I had you already listed previously.
Yeah, I've been on it, but I was on my phone. It went out. Then I got back on the phone. Now I just left the phone alone, and I'm getting on my computer.
Works for me.
Okay, thank you.
Yo, you're welcome. What do you think so far? Is it okay?
Yeah, I think I like it. You know, it's a lot of things I'm learning that I really didn't know. You know, and then it's being it's being like what we're experiencing like now, like a lot of race relations and stuff.
Yep.
It's something to see that, other minorities and other people have suffered, throughout the history, really. And it's just not just one ethnicity that's suffering, but it's a lot of people are suffering, because we all have differences. And, it's just something to see.
I've got 3 young grandkids. And I'm proud of the way I raised my kids, because I've tried my damnedest to raise my kids to where they were taught everybody deserves your respect. It's their God-given right. It's their birthright. It doesn't matter what they look like. You treat everybody with respect.
That's right.
Until they give you a reason not to.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And that's, and I'm trying to share that with my grandkids. But it's funny because when you see kids, I put a bunch of preschool kids in a classroom. They don't see color.
No, they don't.
It's a learned behavior. And until we can figure out a way to stop teaching people that behavior,
right,
it's never going to go away. And we've got to do something to get it to go away, because you love people for their heart and their character and their stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
You don't love them because of what they look like. It's just, that's the one part of our world I wish we could get over.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, I love the United States. I mean, I fought for 10 years. And that's part of my life I would do over. But in the military, you didn't care who was sitting next to you or who had your back. You didn't care what they looked like, because you knew they had your back. And you put your life in their hands, and they put their life in your hands, and you were ready. Brother, sister, whatever. Right now, if Corona wasn't bad enough by itself, with all of this rioting and all this other stuff that's just making the world a worse place, especially America, it just seems like there's one thing after another, and I hate this year.
Yeah, I know it. It's just awful.
Are you ready to go back to school?
No. I don't. Well, I'm kind of ready to go back, but I'm just kind of a feeling about what's gonna, transpire, what's gonna go on when we go back. If we have to go to the building, we have at our school, we had over 600 children last year. So I don't know exactly, what's been put in place and how they're gonna do what. But my main concern is for, the children, because they don't really have a real voice. They may not want to go back, but some of their parents may want them to be there. And to me, right now, it's just still a high risk. It's just, I don't know. But I really don't want to see anybody sick, and I don't want to see it go through our school, because our community is not very big. So the majority of people know almost, I don't say everybody, but a lot of people.
Right, you're here in Helena, aren't you? Where are you at? You're in Helena?
Yeah, I'm in Helena.
That's what I thought. I understand. I mean, I hate going to Walmart because half the people in there aren't wearing masks.
Right.
And you wear masks to protect others, not yourself. Which, when I see one, I'm thinking, well, they could care less about me. Because, I mean, yes, I can catch the virus through the mask, but if I cough or something, that mask is going to catch all that liquid,
right,
and make it harder for you to catch it from me.
Mm-hmm.
And then they crowd you. They,
Mm-hmm. They just won't do right. So
you know, last night they had a city council meeting, and they passed an ordinance about masks. They are not requiring you to wear a mask everywhere you go. But if a store wants to make it mandatory, the city will back them up. Up to the point of the police having people leave if they refuse to follow the directions that you have in your store.
Man.
But I'm like you. I mean, in my job, the favorite part of my job is visiting my schools.
Right.
And I'm nervous about visiting my schools.
Yeah, I know it. I can imagine.
I'm nervous about going back to the I mean, I would much rather do this PD face to face. You know, get to do my pacing and crack my jokes and make y'all smile and see it. That's how I like to teach. And
right.
Can't do it. But.
Right. It's right.
All right. Is everybody else back?
That's a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, I know that you were talking about, and you may do African Americans in a different setting, but when you were talking about the jobs in Michigan, and I know during this time too, that there was also like a great migration of African Americans going to northern cities.
Yes.
Was a lot of it because of the jobs in the industrial areas? Because, you know, I know like a lot of them went up to the Detroit area and, you know, Chicago, up in those areas. Did a lot of it have to do with the jobs from the war? Okay.
Yes, and primarily in Chicago, it was meat.
Okay, yeah.
The majority of your meat processing, beef and stuff like that, was still coming out of Chicago. Huge slaughterhouses. And, but they had jobs and they paid well. Also, African Americans tended to be treated a little better in Chicago and Detroit than they were in Arkansas.
Yeah, I'm listening.
It was an unfortunate fact, but it was still true in the 1940s. You know, it was, I guess, a more positive culture for an African American back then. And I can understand that. I hate it. I despise it. But it was
my grandmother was 90. Well, she was 97 when she died.
Yeah.
But she migrated. I was born and raised in Rockford, Illinois, and she migrated to Rockford, and she worked at this place called Camp Grant, and it was right after the little bit. I think she went up there in like 30 something.
Yeah.
And she used to make like the shirts and like clothing or something like that.
Right.
But it was a Camp Grant in Rockford, Illinois. I'm trying to do the research on it.
That would be interesting to research. And during the 40s, I'll guarantee you they were making uniforms.
Yeah, because she sold a lot. So.
And she was making good money for her time. She was making.
Yeah, for her time. Yeah.
You know, and we didn't have the wages down here. It was just a terrible time. Even when we brought the industry in, you know, the ladies and all that were making bombs and chemical weapons and all were not paid on the same scale as people who would be doing the same job in another part of the country.
Okay.
We've been a little backwards on some things in Arkansas, but all right. So let's listen to Mr. Takai. I hope y'all enjoy this. He's a good interview.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up here in Los Angeles until Pearl Harbor. And then, as I think you know, Japanese Americans on the West Coast were summarily rounded up and sent into 10 barbed wire internment camps. I was 4 at the time of Pearl Harbor, and I was too young to really understand what was going on. But I still do remember that day when armed soldiers with guns, bayonets on them, came to our home to order us out. I remember that as a very scary day. And, you know, a child can sense your parents' anxieties. And we were taken from our home to a horse stable in at San Anita Racetrack, where we were housed for a few months while the camps were being built. And when the camp was built, we were put on a train and taken all the way across the southwestern desert to the swamps of Arkansas, a camp called Roller. And I grew up there for a portion of the war. And then we were transferred from that camp to another camp in Northern California called Tule Lake, which was an even more harsh camp. There were three levels of barbed wire fence and tanks patrolling the perimeter. And after the war, we came back home to Los Angeles.
Now, why were you transferred from Camp Roar to Camp Tule Lake?
Yes, there's a dark chapter of American history in that. Immigrants coming to the United States could all aspire to someday becoming naturalized American citizens, except one group of immigrants from Asia. And so for all intents and purposes at that time, it was excluding Chinese and Japanese immigrants to the United States. They could not be naturalized. When the war broke out, young Japanese American men and women rushed to their local recruitment boards to volunteer to serve in the U.S. Army. But because we looked like the enemy, and simply for that, we were rejected from service. Those that volunteered to serve were classified as 4C, which means enemy non-alien. Now that's a very peculiar term, non-alien. It means a citizen. We couldn't even be called enemy citizens. We were called enemy non-aliens, and they were rejected from service. And we were all incarcerated. But a year into internment, the government realized they had a manpower shortage, and here was all this manpower that we've incarcerated under the label of being potential spies, saboteurs, traitors. How do we tap this manpower? So they came down with what was called a loyalty questionnaire, which in its on the surface sounds outrageous. After they've taken our property, our homes, our businesses, our freedom, and incarcerated us for a year, they want to test our loyalty. It was a series of about 40 questions, and everyone in these internment camps had to respond. Everyone over 17 years of age had to respond to this, answer the questions in the loyalty questionnaire. A 17-year-old girl or a 80-year-old immigrant lady all had to respond to this questionnaire. There were two key questions that the government wanted answers to. Question 27 asked, will you bear arms to defend the United States of America? Can you imagine this question being posed to an 88-year-old immigrant lady or a 17-year-old girl? Question 28, and this was only one sentence, but it had two ideas. It asked, will you swear your loyalty to the United States of America and forswear your loyalty to the Emperor of Japan? Now, for a Japanese American, someone born and raised here, the word forswear your loyalty to the Emperor was very offensive because it assumed that by birth you were ingrained with an inborn loyalty to the Emperor. I mean, you can't forswear something that doesn't exist. So the government assumed that there was an existing loyalty just because we look like this.
Excuse me?
And so if you answered no, meaning I don't have a loyalty to the Emperor to forswear, you were also saying no to the first part. Will you swear your loyalty to the United States? If you answered yes, meaning yes, I will be loyal, you were, fessing up that you had been loyal to the Emperor, and the government was justified in putting you in an internment camp. It turned all 10 camps into turmoil. My father, as I said, was born in Japan and ineligible for citizenship by government, decree. He said, "Gall, to ask me this after they've taken my property, my home, everything. They've taken everything, but there's one thing that they can't take, and that's my dignity. I am not going to grovel before this government." And he answered no to those two questions. And my mother, she's a young mother with 3 young children, 1 a baby. They expect her to go off and carry a gun and fight? No. She said, "This is nonsense. I'm not going to subject myself to it." And she also answered no to those 2 key questions. And because of that, we were removed from the camp in Arkansas to the camp in Northern California. And that's why they had 3 layers of barbed wire fence. We were disloyal.
All right. What do y'all think of that?
Inhumane.
Yeah. It's because of what they were. That wasn't fair. That wasn't right.
No.
It sounds like the way the police question you.
Say it again, you're breaking up.
No,
I said it sounds like the way the police question you. You don't know which way to go.
I think we got 2 people talking on top of each other. Try it again. One of you.
No, I was just saying the trickery with the questioning. And I think she said the same thing. It's kind of like with the police, you don't really know which way or how to answer. It's like damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Sometimes. But this same test was given to every single one of those guys and ladies and kids, because at 17, you're still a kid. And
you're a Japanese American. You've never seen the emperor.
right. Yeah. How many of these people have never been to Japan? They never even thought of themselves as being Japanese. We're talking, Takai was born in the U.S. He was an American citizen based on birth, which is about the only way you could become a citizen. But his parents weren't and couldn't be. But, it's, I don't know. They'd be, I would like to say we're better than that today. Unfortunately, I can't, because we still tend to look at people by the color of their skin and where they come from instead of who they are. But at least we haven't locked everybody up in internment camps. But this entire group of people was totally persecuted, and Arkansas had a part in it because we housed them in 2 different camps. The left picture, just a couple of Japanese American kids. Now, I tried to get these pictures from Rower, but when I did a search on Rower, I was trying to get pictures from Rower. I cannot guarantee that these are from Rower in Deshay County, even though the picture on the right, the landscape's pretty good for the Arkansas Delta.
I think that is it, but
yeah, I'm pretty sure it is, but I can't prove it. But then you've got a dining hall crew. You got a couple of kids, and you've got the actual camp. Doesn't that look like a prisoner of war camp?
that's exactly what it is.
It really is. Speaking of prisoner of war camps, all right. So we came into the war in Europe a little late. And due to this fact, by the time we jumped into the war in Europe, there was already a lot going on. By the time we came in, the German army had pretty much taken over North Africa. They had this German general by the name of Rommel. And Rommel was something special when it came to being a general. He might have been German, but he was he had ethics, morals, did not agree with a lot of the things that were going on with Hitler in the upper. But as a general, he was awesome. He really was. And he kicked Heine all the way across North Africa. Well, the Americans come into the war. And if we're going to take on the Germans, the first thing we have to do is get them out of North Africa and drive them back into Europe. Well, the British Army was involved in this, and they had this general named Montgomery. Montgomery was a pretty good general in the British Army, ran tanks and infantry. Well, we wanted to really help out, so we brought in this guy named Patton. General Patton hated the Germans. In fact, the only thing I think he hated more than the Germans was Montgomery. And Montgomery hated Patton. So they basically strived to outperform each other in North Africa, driving out the Germans. And between the two of them, they did exactly what they were supposed to do. They drove all these Germans out of North Africa. Well, you can imagine we took a ton of prisoners. And these Germans were all part of what was called the Africa Corps. Well, we take all these prisoners. What are we going to do with them? Well, we're going to send them back to the United States because we don't want them re-entering the war. Where are we going to put them? Well, Arkansas is working well for other things. Why don't we put a bunch of them in Camp Robinson in North Little Rock, Arkansas? So that's exactly what they did. Next thing you know, we have German POWs in Arkansas. Well, I'd already told you we had lost a lot of people who had left the state or joined the military, so we had labor shortages in both timber and agriculture. Well, we got these prisoner of wars just sitting in camps. Let's put them to work. So they made it where prisoners of war could and would work in local farms and timber sites. We treated the prisoners very well. Local residents accused the military of coddling the military. And that statement's basically saying that we treated the POWs better than we treated the local populace in a lot of areas. And after the war was over, a lot of these former prisoners, they took farming practices that they learned in Arkansas back to Europe. While a lot of them came back to the United States after the war because they wanted to live here. Well, if you'll look at this map, the right side of Arkansas is the Delta. Y'all all know that, right?
Yeah.
You see all those little white dots?
Yes.
Those are all prisoner of war camps. Now, they are small camps. So what they did was they would take a lot of the prisoners out of Camp Robinson and redistribute them in these smaller camps up and down the Delta. And these German prisoners worked with local farmers. A farmer would drive up with his pickup truck, put a half a dozen prisoners in the back with the guard. They'd go to the farm. They'd work during the day. When it came lunchtime, farmer would take the prisoners to a local mom and pop diner or whatever. Remember, there was no McDonald's in 1940s. You know, take them to eat. They'd go eat lunch. Now, here's just showing how backwards things were at the time. Let's say we're in Dice, Arkansas, little nothing town. And we got a farmer that's got a half a dozen prisoners of war and a guard. And he goes to the local eatery and goes in, orders sandwiches and stuff. And the prisoners are inside this eatery with it. They're inside this little mom and pop diner. Where do you think the African Americans in that town are?
In the back in another room.
Or
outside the back.
Or outside. A lot of them weren't even allowed in these diners. But we're letting German POWs come in. I'm sorry, to me that's just so much wrong with that it's hard to explain. But that's the way it was. So we had all these German prisoners in East Arkansas, and we were teaching them new skills and new trades. Now, my wife and I, one of the things we love to do is if there's not a whole lot going on, you're not seeing fine with the grandkids or the kids or whatever, we like to jump in a vehicle and just drive. We'll jump in a car with a cooler of sodas and pick a direction. Well, one day, just outside of Wilson, Arkansas, I heard about a prisoner of war camp that I wanted to find. And I found it. And these are pictures that I took at this prisoner of war camp. You can see the gates are still up. Or the sides to the main gate are still up. And there's a memorial sign there. But there's still signs of World War II in Arkansas. You just have to go out and find them. And if y'all have never done that, just get out and drive and find things. I can recommend it highly, especially during our COVID, because you're not going to be around anybody else if you're in a car, and it's fun to go just find stuff. So, the end of World War II brought an abrupt change to Arkansas. We don't need any more war materials. Jobs and ordnance plants went away. The plants were abandoned. While many parts of the U.S. did experience a post-war economic boom, Arkansas didn't get that. We didn't have an economic boom in Arkansas after the war. A lot of the people who left the state during the war for better jobs never came back. And why would they? Now they're up in Michigan and Detroit, and they're back to making cars again, and these folks still have jobs. The population in Arkansas fell by 40,000 people between 1940 and 1950. We didn't regain those 40,000 people until 1971. Before World War II, just over half the people in Arkansas lived on farms. Well, that number went down for a couple of reasons, but only 42% of the population lived on farms by 1950 because Arkansas became more urban. We had more cities popping up. And in 1940, there were only 12,000 tractors in Arkansas. By 1945, there were more than twice that number, 26,537. Farms became much more mechanized, needed a lot fewer workers. Arkansas entered the post-war era with several social and economic issues, increased poverty, racial tensions, etc. We had a lot going on after the war was over. And it was going to be a while before we could get a lot of it fixed. And in my opinion, there's still a lot we need to work on. All right. So, you want to find out about World War II? Who do you need to talk to? You talk to somebody who lived it. I served on the USS Lexington. I told you that. The Lexington I served on was the second aircraft carrier with that name. The first one was sank at the Battle of Coral Sea in the May of 1942. I'm a member of the USS Lexington Association. It's a group of men and women who served on the Lexington. And we get together every year and we have a little reunion around the country and we talk about everything. And it's really cool for our ship Because think about it. I served in the 80s on the Lexington, but I have met men who served on the Lexington in the 40s. Same ship. Our stories are a lot different from each other. So it is awesome when we get together. Now, any survivors from the CV2 that were still alive were invited to join our group. Ralph Blackford was one of those guys. I met him in Corpus Christi at a reunion. And being a teacher, I had to interview him. And I wanted to interview him so that I could share his story with students. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And let me tell you about Ralph. Ralph is a little old dude. Ralph is a ball of fire, and he has passed. He was 93 years old when I did the interview. For some reason, Ralph really took a liking to me. And he ended up being my little buddy, and he and his grandson tagged along with me and my wife just about anywhere we went in Corpus Christi during that 3-day reunion. And he was a great friend up until the end, and I really miss him. But so that dinner that we had, you know, whenever you have a big reunion, how do you end it? You have a banquet. And everybody comes in with their wives, and you all sit around huge tables, and you visit, you eat good food, you dance, you have fun. So Ralph and his grandson sit next to me and my wife at the banquet. And Ralph commences to flirt with my wife all night long. I was a little disheartened. I was worried that 93-year-old man was about to take my love of my life from me, because he was a card. And you know, once a sailor, always a sailor, I guess we can say. But I'm going to play this interview. I'm going to probably end it a little early, and that's just because the interview runs almost a half hour. Now, any of you that want to back out and at 11 o'clock and leave the meeting, you can. Let me take a quick roll. I want to make sure everybody gets credit. So everybody get ready to unmute and say here. Felita Reed.
Here.
Tanya Caldwell. Tanya Caldwell. Oh, you're not playing. Benita Burgess Ward. I'm going to have to make people start turning their cameras on.
Anita's camera is on. She's here.
Okay. Can anybody see Tanya?
There's no video.
Okay. Carlicia Gentry.
Here.
Christy Henry.
Here.
Helen Stevens.
Here.
Carlicia Gentry. Oh, I got you already. I listed you twice. Christy Henry.
Here.
Got you listed twice. Laura Starr Phillips.
I'm here.
Linda Sumter.
Here.
Laura Washington.
Here.
Martha Harris.
I'm here.
Melody Montgomery.
I'm here.
Michelle.
Here.
What's your last name, Michelle?
Boone.
Okay. Michelin Gant.
Here. I'm here.
Okay. Rhonda Boston. Ruth Brown.
Here.
Tracy Martin.
Here.
Victoria Parker.
Here.
Did I miss anybody? All right, that means I can mark all of you guys present in ESC Works when we get done. I'm gonna put this on, and I'm gonna stay on during the entire video. After the video's over, I'm gonna stay online for a little bit until people log off in case you have any questions. Now, any of you who need the paperwork, the resources, and didn't get them, you all got the invite from me for the Zoom, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or do y'all want to just write my email address down and I can give it to you? I'll just give it to you right now, and y'all can email me, and I'll respond with all the resources. I want to make sure everybody gets the resources.
I found the resources, Jay. It was in my junk mail.
Well, I'm glad I know where I am now. No problem. I hope y'all like the resources. The article in there, if you teach high school, there's an article from Arkansas historian in there on the Africa Corps in Arkansas. It talks about the prisoner of war camps we're talking about. It is a great read for high school level kids.
This is your patient's information.
But I'm going to go ahead and start this video. Like I said, I'm going to be on after it's over. At 11 o'clock, if y'all need to go, take off. I won't think any less of you. You stuck around for the full 2 hours, and off we go.
It's 228,
Oh,
1138. 714, 5134.
Okay, so I got questions for you. So number one, this is Ralph Blackford. Ralph Blackford is a survivor of the USS Lexington CV-2 that was lost at the Battle of Coral Sea in May of 1942.
88.
Do you have an
Hold
email
on.
address?
Miss Stevens,
Stevens.
can you mute yourself?
Yeah, somebody need to hurry up and mute.
Miss Stevens.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so I got questions for you. Oh, number one, this is Ralph Blackford. Ralph Blackford is a survivor of the USS Lexington CV-2 that was lost at the Battle of Coral Sea in May of 1942.
88. Never forget that date.
So what do you remember? What do you remember the most about it?
About the battle?
About the whole. What was like before the battle? What was it like to be on the CV-2?
Well, to start with, I was never on anything that big to start with. In fact, coming from Indiana, I knew rowboats or things like that. I didn't really know ships.
Right.
And up until I got to Great Lakes, where I took my training, the biggest thing that I saw there was still a rowboat where there was 4 or 5 of us out there rowing at one time.
Right.
And then I think from there, probably the biggest thing I saw was the ferry going from Bremerton, Washington, or Seattle to Bremerton.
So what was it like to see the Lexington for the first time?
Well, it's like I said, my God, look at the size. You can't imagine. I'm in a stick truck, and it got sea bags sitting in there, and me and a couple other guys, and we were sitting on those sea bags. That's why I said, my God, look at the size of that thing. It looked bigger than the cranes that was there loading stuff on it. So it was just huge.
What was your job on the Lexington?
When I first went aboard, I was assigned to V1 Division, which was basically one of the aviation divisions. But really, my first job was mess cook.
Okay.
And at that time, we didn't have the galleys on there like they have now. We had to go, we set up tables in our mess compartments, or sleeping compartments.
Okay.
We had a container over here, we put our sea bags in. And until we was actually assigned to a division, we had our sea bags or hammocks swung up in there, and we slept in that same compartment. After I was assigned to the compartment and was still mess cooking, we would get the tables down. We had china. We put the china down on the table. We'd go down and get a big coffee pot full of coffee, have it there on the table for the guys to have coffee. And they'd have one of the senior POs that would be
Okay, so I got questions for you. Number one, this is
in our mess compartments or sleeping compartments.
Okay.
We had POs that would be assigned to the table. You take care of that table and the guys on the table. So we had to run clear down to the galley. After we just set up the table, we'd run clear down to the galley. We'd come back with trays of food or trains filled with food. We'd set them on the table. When they got empty, you go back and get some more. And I can remember coming one day, I'm coming through there with a platter full of steak. And we was clear back in one of the after compartments.
Okay.
So we had the furthest distance to go to get food. So you tried to make time, and I'm going through there, and I stubbed my toe on one of the hatches, and I fell. Steak and me and gravy was just going across the linoleum deck at that time. That was before they took all the linoleum out when the war started.
Right.
So it's things like that. But then I was assigned to where I was working with Petty Officer First Class. His name was Griffith. And I have met him at the different reunions where I went. He was plane captain for an SOC. It was a float type plane, or you could convert it for use on the carrier or float, either one.
Right.
If it was float, we'd hang it over the side and lower it into the water with the crane, and then it'd take off from the water. If we was going into, say, someplace like Bremerton, when we went down the straits, as they launch it, he'd fly into some airport there by Bremerton, Washington. But we had another one, it was called a JRF. It had a pontoon built into it.
Right.
And I've seen the captain fly that thing, and he always had to have a pilot. He landed that in Long Beach Harbor one time, and I think it bounced 3 or 4 times going across that harbor. I felt sorry for the guy that had to ride in that pontoon part, because he couldn't ride it, and yet he would have a pilot with him and a mech that would be riding down below.
Wow.
So, but that was our ship's plane. When the squadrons come aboard, that was an entirely different thing.
All right. So when did you join the Navy?
1940.
So you were in the Navy when the Japanese attacked. Where were you?
We was on Lexington, and we was on our way to Midway with a squadron of Marine planes that we were taking to Midway.
What was it like to find out that the Japanese had attacked? What were the people saying?
I could tell you exactly what the...
Well, this may go to high school kids, so we gotta...
The air officer, well, we got the news. The captain announced, come over the loudspeaker system, the Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, and we're to change our plans. So we had part of those planes up on deck, all right. We had to put them all back down on the hangar deck, and the air officer, he's on his microphone, scram cast. In other words, a scramble cast was having everybody come back no matter how you could, and when you get here, we'll land you. So as soon as they come on board, they were
Hold on just a second. Okay, now go ahead.
As soon as they came on board, they loaded them with live ammunition. If they had dummy bombs or anything, that was all taken off. It was loaded with live ammunition, live bombs, and sent out immediately in search patterns.
How close were y'all to Pearl Harbor when it happened?
We was only about 400 miles from Midway.
Yeah, y'all were pretty close.
Giving us 3 or 4 hours more, and we'd have the planes off and on the way to Midway. So, which would have probably been a help for Midway when they was in there.
Yeah.
So, but we got them out. They were sent out and on patrol, and we were probably very fortunate that day because we were ordered south, and they hit and doubled back and went back the way they came.
Okay.
If we would have went north, we'd run right into the whole Japanese fleet.
So, yeah, that wouldn't have been good.
No, because there would have been 1 carrier, 2 cruisers, and maybe 4 destroyers against the whole Japanese fleet that was up there. That wouldn't have been any contest at all.
No, so, we'd have lost her earlier than we did.
Yeah. As it was, we went south, and the only thing that we saw that looked like a ship was a barge, and they did attack the barge. I don't think they done much damage to it.
Okay, so now we go forward. When y'all pulled into Pearl, I'm sure, before you went.
Oh, the first time we pulled into Pearl, what a mess. I think it was, I don't remember now which one was in the channel, but they beached it far enough up on the side of the channel that we could get in and out. And when we saw Battleship Road, that was just something that you can't believe. And of course, normally we would have tied up what they call 1010, which was on, I don't know whether that's the north side of Fort Island or south side. But anyway, we were right next to the officers' quarters on Fort Island, and they pulled the old Utah in there, which is used for bombing ship, and tied it up at our dock, and it got hit with all the torpedoes that were supposedly going for the Lexington.
Doggone it. Sorry, somebody was trying to get in. I restarted.
Okay.
Let's see if I can find it.
In fact, at the time, the Enterprise was trying to land planes, and some of our guys were shooting at them because they didn't realize, and sent out immediately in search patterns.
How close were y'all to Pearl Harbor when it happened? Yeah, that wouldn't have been good.
No, because there would have been, I think it was, I don't remember now which one was, I don't know whether that's the north side of
All right, this is pretty
Fort
close.
Island or
Sorry about
south
that.
side. But anyway, we were right next to the officers' quarters on Fort Island, and they pulled the old Utah in there, which is used for bombing ship, and tied it up at our dock, and it got hit with all the torpedoes that were supposedly going for the Lexington. Just because, see, they didn't know we'd left.
Right, yeah. They didn't know you were at sea.
We left Friday night after dark.
See, the Hornet and the Lexington, weren't y'all the 2 primary carriers out of Pearl at that time, or in that area?
Well, the Enterprise was on its way out.
Okay.
In fact, at the time, the Enterprise was trying to land planes, and some of our guys were shooting at them because they didn't realize the Enterprise was in the area, and anything that was in the air, they were shooting at. So some of the Enterprise planes were shot at, and they might have knocked 1 or 2 of them down, I don't know.
Okay, so war's going, everybody's really hating the Japanese. Let's talk about Coral Sea.
Well, at Battle of the Coral Sea, actually we had some time before that.
Okay, go ahead.
We were trying to sneak into Rabaul and hit their air base there. and we were spotted by what they called a Japanese Betty. It was a Japanese flying boat. And once we found out we'd been spotted, we knew there'd be somebody coming out from Rabaul after us. And they sent out high-level bombers. That's when Butch O'Hare became an ace. He shot down 5 planes, just seesawing through them like that. And he ran out of ammunition, or he got more. But, and one of the things you talk about is cool skipper. Frederick Sherman stood there on the deck with a pair of binoculars watching some of those bombers coming in like that. He said, when I give you the helm, word, helmsman, put her over hard right. And, okay, helmsman, for hard right. So we swung. Those bombs just fell off to the stern of one side. But he waited until he could see that they released to put the helm over. So that's
nerve.
That's what I call.
That's a game of chicken.
Well, yeah, in a way.
Who flinches first?
But the fact that he was standing there with binoculars watching them, and he could tell when it was done, and of course, part of that turkey shoot we could see from the deck. Of course, now my job was up on the bridge with the air officer and the captain, and then in fact, there was only 4 of us on the bridge during most of these battles. That was the captain, the helmsman, and the air boss, and me. And there might have been a signalman back on the after part of the bridge, but we never see him. And all we had for protection up there, because at that time, when we went into battle, all the glass up in the bridge area was lowered, and what I had was, let's say, 3/8 or 1/4 inch of steel between me and anything coming flying. And same way with the air boss. I'd be sitting up there behind an alidade with headphones on, and I'm relaying messages from him to all the flight deck stations. The captain gave him a message, and he relayed them to me, and round and round we go. So, then the next real engagement we made was when they flew over the hump at, I was going to say Guadalcanal, that's not right. It's the island north of Australia, though, okay, where we was on one side. They flew our planes over the mountains and attacked the Japanese coming down on the other side.
Okay.
And that was Salomon and Ley, whatever the
Solomon Islands.
And then after that, that's when we got into to the problem at Coral Sea.
All right, so
when we got into there,
yes, sir.
That's the first time the 2, what you say, prime vessels or the main vessels of a fleet never saw each other, because we're 75 to 125 miles apart. So we never saw the ships of the Japanese, and the Japanese never saw us. It was all from the air. When we were spotted, it was all from the air. So in other words, our plane was attacking their carriers, their planes was attacking us in New Yorktown, and so that was the big battle. And as it turned out, we got the worst part of it as far as torpedoes and bomb hits. Yorktown had a bomb hit in the flight deck and couldn't really conduct air operations. So some of them got back and land alongside and would be picked up. And we were steaming back to Australia until the aviation gas started leaking out. So they had pressured the gas lines at various times. If they found a leak, they'd close it off right away. But apparently one had been missed somewhere along the line. We don't know. But anyway, once that aviation gas started spreading and fumes started spreading, that put fire in any place those fumes were. And that's when we also lost the speed on the boilers or whatever.
Lost the pressure on the boilers.
I'm not familiar with the engineering terms because I was never an engineer.
See, that's me. I'm an engineer, so that part I get. And
well, that would be the way of my son-in-law, because he worked in subs, so he knew the sub parts. So, or my grandson would know some of the engineering because he studied at Purdue University and stuff. Anyway.
Okay, so what caused the initial damage? Was it torpedoes or bombs on the Lexington?
Our main damage was torpedoes.
That's what I thought.
And to me, there's still a question of exactly how many. And I've heard it anywhere from 3 to 6.
Yeah.
When I've looked through official stuff that I can find on TV, and you can see official logs and official reports from the various departments on there. It's all on TV.
Yes, sir.
If you want to, or not TV, but computers, if you want to go look for it.
I've done a little bit, but.
I think at that time, the official count was 5. Right. I know at one time the engineering officer was a Commander Junker. He called the bridge and he says, "Captain, if we've got to take any more, let's take them on the starboard side." So everything was coming to the port side, which is left.
Right. Yes,
so,
sir.
well, some of the kids might not know that.
Well,
but
you're right. You're absolutely right. I forget you're talking to them too.
Yeah. Port starboard. So, in other words, we had one, what I call the most serious bomb hit, was on our port gun galley. That ship was laid down as a battle cruiser and then converted to a carrier.
Right.
So it's different than the current carriers, and there was also what they called a straight deck carrier. There was no place where they could launch and land planes at the same time. So as landing planes, you land them all, send them forward, and then move them back so they're ready to launch. Now then they can launch them with a catapult and shoot them off from one direction and be landing them over here in the other direction. But I sort of lost my train of thought.
Okay, the damage. Okay, we got the bomb on the gun magazine.
Yeah, we got the bomb on that gun deck. It killed 14 Marines on that and just mangled that whole. We had one other smaller bomb hit aft by what had been our after turret, or back beyond the stack. But that didn't cause that much damage, and I don't, in my estimation, I don't think either one of those bomb hits caused that much of a fire.
Do you think the fuel leaks were the biggest problem?
The fuel leaks was the main culprit, because after the battle was over, we were steaming for Australia, making almost 30 knots. And then we just lost all our power. So apparently the gas and the fumes were getting to the point where it was in the engine rooms and was causing us, you couldn't stay in them to control the engine, so you just lose your power.
How many men were lost?
I've heard 1 to 1.5%. And out of a crew of about 3,000, that's a very small amount when you consider what all we did have.
But still.
We lost more people out of the squadrons that never found a place to land or was shot down, things like that. So we lost.
Now,
I don't know how many people was lost out of the squadrons entirely.
Now, next couple of questions, or maybe questions you hadn't been asked. Number one, what ship rescued y'all?
I was picked up by a boat I say a motorboat. I'm not sure which it was off of because we had 8 cruisers out there, and 4 or 8. But I was picked up and taken to the Astoria, which is a light cruiser. And I was able to step right off the gunwale of the boat right onto the deck of the ship.
Next question. Of course, you had pride for the Lexington. Anybody who's never been in the Navy can understand the pride a sailor has for their ship. What was your feelings when you found out that the crew that was building the Cabot had decided to call her the Lexington in honor of y'all?
As far as I'm concerned, I just thought it was great that the name is going on. I'm quite sure at the time that CV-16 come out and was engaged in battle with the Japanese, they probably wondered what was going on. That thing has been sunk, and we've even been told it's been sunk. But
that's the reason she's the Blue Ghost.
So, yeah, because actually we were sunk in May, but it wasn't revealed to the general public until September.
I didn't know that.
I happened to be home on leave at the time that it was officially announced that it was sunk. And my dad was a welder in a powder plant down in Alabama, and he called my uncle and says, I hear the Lexington's been sunk. Have you heard from our boy? He said, he's sitting here in the house. You want to talk to him? So this is my uncle. I had 2 uncles. They were my dad's brothers, Frank and George. And the youngest one, and he and I were only a couple of years apart. So I spent a lot of time with my grandmother as far as I go. So in other words, when I went home to Union City, Indiana, which is a small town, everybody knew everybody else. And so when I went home, glad to see you. And then when the news come out, immediately the newspaper there in town, they wanted to talk to me. And because they knew I was in town, and when they come out, the Lexington was sunk, then they interviewed me, and I've still got a copy of the paper that come out with my picture on the front page. At that time I was still 3rd class yeoman, and so I've carried that around for a lot of years. It's getting pretty tattered anymore.
All right, Mr. Blackford, you were on TV. I know this here recently, and you told a story to the TV crew. We've only got a couple of minutes where this camera is going to say enough. But can you do me a favor and tell the story of the ice cream?
Well, what it was, we were given the order to get ready to abandon ship. So everybody was to meet on the flight deck. So we're on the after end of the flight deck, and I don't know, somebody got a crazy idea. Hey, let's raid the gear dunk stand. So they go down and they get all the ice cream cans out of the ice cream equipment. They brought it up on the flight deck, and they're cutting it out with knives and whatnot. Get you a handful and eat ice cream. So we was getting rid of the ice cream. No sense leaving it there to waste. So it's going to go down anyway. So we ate that, but we found out very shortly that ice cream and salt water don't mix too good. So.
Well, I really appreciate you taking some time out. This is going to be used to teach. I have the most admiration you'd ever imagined for World War II veterans. I think the word hero gets thrown around, and I know you're going to disagree with me, and I don't care, but I don't think the word hero gets thrown around way too much. And I believe that our veterans from World War II, that you guys really are heroes. I mean that.
I think there's a lot more of them. There's a lot more of a hero than I am. But
we can agree to disagree.
Yeah.
But thank you again. We'll shake your hand.
See, that's just for your information. And when I got on that troop transport, But we're circling around over off the coast of Casablanca, coast of Morocco.
Yes, sir.
The Missouri's lobbing shells across the Atlas Mountains and sunk the Jean Bart in the harbor at Casablanca. And we went in there. We weren't the only troop transport in the group.
Right.
But we went in there and tied up alongside and disembarked all our troops. Then when we left there, now we were able to steam at about 27 knots. And it had been the SS Count Granby, which has been an Italian luxury liner. In fact, there was a plaque in the deck when I went aboard there for duty where the purser's office would have been up in front. That Mayor Jimmy Walker and the movie star was married in that ship.
Where did you go after the Lexington?
That's where I went.
Okay, the troop carrier.
To the Monticello. I thought it was a new light cruiser built in Philadelphia. Otherwise, I'd have went with the air boss where he was going as commanding officer of the other ship. He was going to a smaller carrier. So I say jeep carrier. I don't know.
No, what do they call it? The jeep carriers or truck carrier? They were the
smaller. Yeah. Sometimes they was carrying planes just from here to there. That was before they had much of the helicopter use, something like they have now.
Right.
This is some of the things that have evolved over the time. That's like us, when that Air Force guy I'm playing golf with, what kind of planes did you have on there? I said, F1, F2, or 3, TBDs, SBC-2Us, SBDs. He said, my God, you had old ones, didn't you? I said, we had antiques, really, when you consider going to war.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, and you were going against Zeros, which at the time
was
top of the line.
Some of the best aircraft probably in the world at that time.
Top of the line. But they underestimated us.
So.
In the manufacturing might.
Yeah.
I mean, how many Essex-class carriers were built during World War II?
I don't really know.
8, maybe?
I would say they were turning them out a lot faster than they are now.
I mean, they came out in a hurry, and that's one of them right there. It's even serious.
All right, guys. What'd y'all think of Ralph?
It was pretty cool.
I enjoyed it.
I tell you what, if you ever get the chance to talk to an old veteran, our World War II veterans are almost all gone. If you get a chance to talk to one and do what I did there, just set up a camera and just talk to them. And then share it with people. They have got so much history they know. And Ralph's sharp. Ralph was sharp up to the end. His mental faculties weren't lacking at all. And, you know, he gives you the human side, which you can't get in a textbook.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just can't pick that up in a textbook. So, all right, guys. Well, number one, thank y'all for coming to the training. I mean, you have no idea how much I enjoyed teaching it. In case you can't tell, I'm kind of passionate about the subject. And I put a lot of time and effort into this presentation just because it meant so much. But did everybody get their resources?
Yes.
I received it.
All right, I'm gonna stop the share now so we can go back to our Brady Bunch view. Does anybody have any questions or any comments? Now, you folks in Helena are going to have to sit through this one again probably, because Miss Anderson has me doing 2 hours of Arkansas history the first week of August when y'all go back to school.
Can you tell her that some of us already said to this?
Well, I'll tell you what, when I go in and mark y'all present on ESC Works, you're gonna get the evaluation you got to fill out, which be kind, be nice, and then you'll get your certificates after you do that. Print out your certificates and give them to Miss Anderson. Let her know you've sat through the training already. Okay. Anything I need to work, I've always done this kind of training face to face. Is there anything I need to work on to make the Zoom better?
I enjoyed it.
Was the volume and everything good on the presentations?
Yeah, everything was
Yeah,
fine.
you did a good job.
Yeah.
I'm still learning, guys, just like y'all. I mean,
I enjoyed it too.
if we're having to do blended in the fall, which, you know, a lot of our schools are giving the parents the choice to either send their kids to school or let them stay home and participate online. Y'all are going to be professional online instructors before this is over and done with. Yeehaw. I do recommend getting a background up. This way you don't have to look at my dirty office at my house, my cluttered up office where I've got everything spread out. And I like my Great Rivers logo, the way I've colored it up. I think it looks all right. But guys, thank y'all so much for coming. If y'all have any questions, do y'all all have my email address?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. Well, that concludes our class. I'll stick around for a few minutes in case anybody has any one-on-one questions they want to ask. When everybody's faces, beautiful faces disappear, I'll log out. Thank you again, guys.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I can't hear you, Benita. I can see you moving your mouth, but I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Go to chat. Nope, can't hear you. I see your mouth. Are you in Helena? Where are you at? Okay. Call me.